Welcome to this interview series. My name is Christina Theodoraki. I'm editor of Small Business Economics and Entrepreneurship Journal, and I have the great honor today to interview Christopher Hayter from Arizona State University, Bruno Fischer from University of Campinas, and Einar Rasmussen from Norway University Business School. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today to this interview series.
Thank you, Christina.
So our invited authors today are going to give us more insights on their paper published in Small Business Economics in December 2021, entitled Becoming an Academic Entrepreneur, How Scientists Develop an Entrepreneurial Identity. So starting my first question, could you please tell us more about your article and what is your article about?
Thank you, Christina. I'm gonna take this first question. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So in this article, we work with the conceptualization of identity development. So we're talking here about the notion of who am I, how people perceive themselves. So applied to the context of academic entrepreneurship. So we worked on a review of literature on academic entrepreneurship and also identity literature. To build this model, this framework to analyze identity reconfiguration in scientists. So how they come from this academic identity, this scientific identity, and they become engaged with research commercialization. So this is the core aspect of our paper. So this path that individuals go through, successfully or not, to become engaged in research commercialization. And then we introduce some aspects, the moderators that affect this path, involving agency and passion in individuals, the limit of competences. So the skills required for individuals to develop to incorporate this new identity, aspects related to social support, organizational, institution, and ecosystem support as well. So involving the university, laws that affect research commercialization, and also other stakeholders in the ecosystem, how they affect this process. And lastly, the temporal factors associated with this liminal process, this transition from the academic identity to this hybrid or entrepreneurial identity in individuals. This is the core message we developed in this article.
We may also ask, why is your article important, and what do we know from your article, what we learned from your article that we didn't know before?
So let me take this. So basically, the key thing here is that we know that for academic research to be commercialized and used in society, it's often very important that the scientists or the academics are involved and sometimes engage as entrepreneurs to commercialize their knowledge. But we also know that let's say the logic of being an entrepreneur is quite different from being a businessman or an entrepreneur. So it's sometimes very difficult to make this transition from being a scientist to becoming an entrepreneur and what all this means. And from the literature, there has been a lot of studies kind of looking at what are the characteristics of successful entrepreneurs and scientists that become successful entrepreneurs. And even more, the academic entrepreneurship literature has grown a lot, and a lot of studies on what characterizes universities that are successfully commercializing and having a lot of academic entrepreneurship. But there is fairly little known about these really micro level processes and what really happens when a scientist get into the role of being an entrepreneur. I see that even I've been doing interviews of academic entrepreneurs, and I remember once I was talking to some professors that just started a company, and they were talking a lot like academics and about the research and how they are going to do more research and fund the research and how they are going to spread this idea. And then I talked to them 1 year later, and then they talked a lot more like an entrepreneur or a businessman, and was a lot concerned about the venture and how to acquire funding and reach the market. So it was very interesting to actually look into what kind of process is going on. So in that sense, the main contributions of this article is actually to combine some of these elements we have seen in the academic entrepreneurship literature about this micro level process, and use the identity theory to put these elements together and try to conceptualize what is going on in this process. That I mean, we have known it's there, but we don't know really so much about it. And the other compelling thing about this study is that in some ways, going from being an academic to an entrepreneur is sort of an extreme version of this transition of identity. So you can think about going from a corporation to being an entrepreneur is also a transition, but maybe not that dramatic. So I think in this way, we also can have contributions to how other, let's say, identities like a musician or a chef or other can make a transition to an entrepreneur. It would be a sort of analog process to this. So somewhat.
Thank you very much for this response. And can you please elaborate more on how did you get this specific idea for your research?
Sure, Christina, and again, thank you for hosting us. This is quite the honor. First was really a project that I had with a colleague of mine, Marla Parker, and really had nothing to do per se with entrepreneurship. And the idea of the project was really to examine factors that influence the transition of postdoctoral fellows, which we have in all scientific countries or institutions for the most part, and their transition to non-academic careers. And the inspiration for this question were really some stark statistics that we know, at least in the United States and perhaps other countries are similar, but about 85 to 90% of postdocs, depending on the discipline, do not obtain academic jobs. So my colleague, who was a postdoc, and I asked the question, well, what happens? How do they make this transition? And we found that most postdocs face a number of significant structural and policy and sort of PI related or principal investigator related struggles or hurdles or obstacles. But in the process, we also noticed that postdocs were describing their transition itself as an existential crisis, right? Something that really shook their being. And I'm quoting now from some of our participants. And we wanted to understand how to explain this crisis where their being was shaken. So after a couple of years, I'd searched for some frameworks, some ways of explaining this, but I heard a presentation by a scholar here at Arizona State who's very well known in the identity space. His name's Blake Ashforth. And I heard him present a paper on identity transitions. And the proverbial light went off that this was the lexicon or the framework that we were really looking for to help explain this. Simultaneously, I was doing some work, as I've done for a long time, with entrepreneurial interventions and trying to understand their impact. And so as Einar alluded to, I think that this micro level view of how we think of ourselves and our team is really, what happens inside our brains collectively, cognitively, and emotionally is really something that we're just now beginning to understand really plays an important role in these, not only identity transitions, but also in the broader theme of entrepreneurship.
Very insightful, and thank you very much for sharing this view and idea where it came from. We definitely need more and more research on this topic, and actually this follows my next question. Where do you see research on this topic going forward, and what new ideas are you working on today or in future research? See.
Bruno, would you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree, Christina. This is a topic that definitely deserves further research. So this idea, this micro level analysis in terms of technology transfer, research, commercialization has gained some ground over recent years only. What I'm involved with right now, and I'm gonna get in touch with Chris and Einar pretty soon. So we're negotiating with our university here to run a series of interviews first in the first semester with academics from engineering departments. So we want to apply this framework that we developed and try to refine it with this inductive approach. And then the next step is probably to try to create a survey, a quantitative analysis, a pilot study in our university with several hundreds of faculty members, and perhaps hopefully extend this to other universities, not only in Brazil, but also in other countries. But most importantly, I wanted to bring this to at least to our university policy to try to monitor how this process is happening. Because we're talking about something that it's a process. It's not something that happens at one point in time and it's done. So we're talking about individuals developing or incorporating new identities, new forms of perceiving what they do and who they are and their academic careers. So if we can establish a monitoring strategy for this, that would be great. So these are both elements oriented to the academic research for my part, but also try to incorporate this in what we've been doing at our university.
Great. Can you tell us more about your findings and your modeling, how we can apply it? Which populations can serve more of your findings or your model or the reflection in this paper? And do you have any advices for next steps to implement probably this process for practitioners?
I think Einar and I are going to take that. Einar, do you want to start or?
Yeah, I could start, and I think there is a couple of factors here, but I think our results sort of show that there is kind of this interplay between the individual and the ecosystem in the context around, and we know it's to kind of promote scientists to become entrepreneurs. It's our model suggests that it's very important that they have the opportunity to actually experiment and try to develop this new identity, and it's also shaped kind of by the social support and the ecosystem around. So I think this kind of openness, because as Chris said, it's kind of a fairly existential process. So actually that the surroundings allow and encourage people to try, and it's fine to either become an entrepreneur or decide to do not. So that kind of flexibility. And I also want to add that it's really interesting to think about the implications for training of entrepreneurs and what kind of interventions that can be done. So to look more into identity and mindset issues and so on. So that's also a topic that I have become more interested involved in the process of writing the paper.
I'll also add that, you know, we see this paper as a beginning. You know, that there have been a lot of wonderful scholars who know far more about identity than at least I do. I can speak for myself. And so we see this as a sort of a field orientation. We're very interested in our own fields and walks of life, our research interests in this application, but we also know that we cover a lot of conceptual ground in the paper. And so I think that there's actually micro level aspects of our paper that can even be focused on as well. So where do motivations come from? How do individuals get motivated to become interested in entrepreneurship? So I think that's an example of a subset of things that we talk about that researchers can think about. I think on the practitioner end, we've long understood that resources are important, that social networks are critical to entrepreneurial development, and that entrepreneurship is really, forgive the metaphor, but it's a team sport, right? But we're beginning to understand that those early identity dynamics that are both within us and among us as an entrepreneurial team are really critical to the development of the entrepreneur herself. So specifically, we need to understand how individuals define themselves professionally, right? And as Einar was talking about, it could be a chef or a scientist, but then we need to understand how that self-definition might fit, or in many cases conflict with efforts to help them become entrepreneurs. And I can say that most entrepreneurial interventions do not account for that self-definition, both as an individual level and at a team level. And so, this is also where context matters. So as I mentioned, this is, I've often heard policymakers say, well, we need to create a fund. Well, obviously resources are important. This is great in concept, but this often overlooks at least the initial intrinsic motivations for why individuals become scientists or chefs or musicians in the first place. So rhetorically, how do we provide the liminal or experimental spaces that enable individuals like scientists to play with an entrepreneurial identity and allow them to say, I'm not interested, but on the flip side, also allow individuals who may not initially conceive of themselves as entrepreneurs to say, I can do this. So I think that it really is where we see the sort of scholarship and practitioner nexus.
Thank you very, very much, Christopher, Bruno, and Einar, for the insightful research and also the inspiring discussion today, and for sharing with us all these findings and insights and ideas. I like very much your paper, so I encourage also our readers and fellows to read your article. So our readership can also download your paper from the website of Springer. The paper is in open access, so they can freely download it. So thank you again for sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.